Hello, this is a how-to video for teaching a group-based reading lesson, ideally for a history class. My name is Jackson Wolf Smith. I am an education and history student, and I've done this lesson myself, and it worked out pretty well. So let's get into it. The lesson itself, this how-to video is a open framework. So ideally, you could use it in just about any history class of high school level or above. Potentially, it could be used for middle school. However, the lower level of maturity and less proficiency in reading could make it difficult. It also could potentially be used in other subjects. I think a science class could use something similar to this. But because I am more knowledgeable on teaching history, more interested in it, and that is the subject I taught my version of this lesson in, I thought I would keep it focused ideally on a history course. But feel free to change it as needed. I would be very happy to hear if someone else used it for any other subject, really. All right, so part one is the reading itself. So you're going to need a reading or a series of readings that will teach whatever the lesson you want is. For example, I did mine on the Manhattan Project, but you could do yours on anything else. So obviously it needs to be of the level that your class can read because they're going to be reading it in class. So you don't want it to take all day for them to read it, of course. Next, you're going to want to split the reading or readings into bite-sized chunks. Once we split our class into their own groups, each group will have their own chunk of the reading. Uh, it's of course up to you how long you want the students to spend actually reading, but I think I would want them to at least be done with the reading by a third of the time for the lesson. So a third of the class if you want this to take the full class period. When you're going through the readings, I would take notes or plan out some specific questions for each chunk in order to make sure you know what you want them to learn from each individual reading, or each section of the reading rather. And this will come up multiple times later on. Part two will be the groups themselves. As far as group sizes, I prefer groups of four, but three can kind of work. Five can also work pretty well. I would say four or five is the best. Three is pretty good. I would not go up to six or above because that'll make it much easier for obviously some people to not contribute into the small group discussion of the reading. And in pairs, you may not have enough help from each student. However, you could do that if you wanted to. That would be essentially read pair share as opposed to think pair share. Students are encouraged to help each other in this reading. In this lesson. It's actually the main point of the lesson, having them read together and then discuss it and then share out as a group means they have to work together. And it's much better to, for lack of a better term, force your students to work with their groups as opposed to just encouraging it. This is also very helpful if you have second language learners in the class because then the native speakers can, the native speakers can help those second language learners better. This is actually something Pauline Gibbons talks about in her book. And lastly, of course, make sure the groups are viable. If there's a pair of students who talk and disrupt the class, then don't put them together. But if there are a pair of students who one of them likes to help the other, that could be helpful or could be effective. As for the lesson itself, announce to the class that you'll be putting them into the groups. I would have the groups pre-prepared, but you could do it at the time if you want. and tell them they're each going to have a reading. Once they're done with the reading, they will announce what they learned to the rest of the class. While they're reading, go between each group, ask them some questions, make sure they're understanding what you want them to, make sure they understand the main points of the readings. Again, your notes or questions that we mentioned in part 1 are going to be very important here. It's always better to know beforehand what you want them to, as opposed to trying to remember it as they ask you questions. And of course, if they have questions with the language being used in the reading, feel free to help them. And also, going around the room, make sure that people are staying on task. As far as the timing goes, arguably a better way for determining the timing than I said earlier would be just half of whatever the time you have is what they have to read and discuss it. So from the point you give them each their readings, after half of the time they have, that's when they have to share out to the rest of the class. As far as the groups sharing, I would just go pick a group, have them share. It could just be one person. It could be the whole group giving their own points. Ideally, the more people, the better. But that's not always going to happen. And of course, make sure they cover everything you want them to cover. And if they don't, again, go back to your notes and your questions and ask them one of those questions if you went with questions. Otherwise, come up with a way of leading them to the point you want them to make. All right, that's everything. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you try this out in your own classes. Thank you for watching.